Hello, this is Brian Scuttle of Sonic Cinema. I had the chance to talk to co-writer and director Mickey Reece and star producer Molly Quinn about their horror movie Agnes, which is coming out on Friday, December 10th. I hope you enjoy those interviews. It was a lot of fun to talk to them. First of all, I wanted to say that I really was quite taken by this film. I thought it was I thought it was a beautiful film that really takes a wonderful turn from something that's conventionally horror to something more dramatic, and I really appreciate that about it. And the first thing I wanted to ask you was, what was it? How did you get hold of the script and decide that you wanted to work on it?
Mm. We were looking at a couple of different scripts at the time, trying to figure out what we wanted to do at Quagmire. They were all in the horror space. And when I saw Climate of the Hunter, I got a better idea of how Agnes could be done. It
Mm-hmm.
really kind of clicked into place. And my partners, Matthew and Alon, felt the same way. So that's why we chose Agnes, because at some point you just have to start.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a believer in, like, you can spend a lot of time trying to, weigh the pros and cons, but at some point it doesn't matter if you don't just start. So there was as much research as we could put into it. And then finally it was me just pulling the trigger and being like, this is the one we're going to do.
Mm-hmm. Where did the itch, after working in front of the camera for so long, where did the itch to start producing come from?
It really started all the way back in my Castle days with a producer named Lori Zacks. I was so young when I started acting, and still love it. I love it now just as much as I did then. But at 12 years old, you have no idea what it actually takes to make a movie. You don't know what a producer is. You barely know what a director is. You don't understand everything. And when I started doing Castle and I started becoming aware of what producers did, which to me was, okay, these are the facilitators of the grand image.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I may tell a part of the story, but they're the ones who make sure that all of the pieces fit. And they were women. I was surrounded from the very beginning with incredible female producers, and and that's when it started. So, in a lot of the movies that I did after that, if you like deep dive, you can see I have a lot of like associate producer credits, because I was interested in the casting process. I was interested not just in like my wardrobe, but in what everyone else was going to wear. And so a lot of those productions really fostered that. Like, no one told me no. Everyone took my curiosity and said, okay, if she's curious, let's let her do more, and let's
Mm-hmm.
credit that appropriately. So, whether people were being kind or whether I was actually being helpful, who's to say? But it really empowered me. So
Mm-hmm.
it was a lot of those female producers in my life that encouraged me to keep going. And now we're at a place where, I had worked with different producing partners, and it hadn't been a perfect fit. And now, with Matthew Welty, who's one of my best friends, and then Alon Gale, who's, my fiance and other partner, it just fits, but
Mm-hmm.
it took a long time to find.
And I will say, it's funny when Agnes came into my inbox. My wife and I had actually just started binge watching Castle, and so it felt almost cosmic that this opportunity arose. I have to say, going through the series again, it was really great to see the way that the character of Alexis builds and grows and turns into, and the way that sometimes she's very much in a teenager or young adult. At other times she's almost a parent to her father, and it was really fun to see that development over the seasons.
Thank you. Can I ask, was it weird to be watching the show and then to watch Agnes? Was it kind of Was it jarring at all?
Not maybe not as much as I would expect it to be.
Yeah.
And I think part of that is because of the fact that, and we can go ahead and start talking about Agnes, because one of the things that's really interesting about Agnes and your character in particular is the fact that she's somebody who's very much in the crowd at the start of the movie. And then through her relationship with Agnes, we start to focus in more on her. And that essentially becomes her movie. And I can see that trajectory, you can kind of see that same kind of trajectory and arc in the way that Alexis was built, in the same way that Mary goes through this film. And I really, that was one of the things that was so striking about the film, other than the fact that because it basically becomes one thing and then turns into something very different.
Yeah. Thank you for letting me ask that question, because I was interested in the answer, because I've been very curious to see people's reaction, having been fans of Castle, because it's a different role, but I think what I'm hearing you say is those similarities and kind of the sensitivity that Mary has. I think I absolutely learned while playing Alexis, and like having that time, to fully create a human being. And with Mary, I think you feel that same sensitivity that, this is a woman who is running from something and desperately trying to, protect herself in a very heightened world, right?
Yeah.
Like there's possession, and there are people that are leering at her, and she doesn't feel safe. I think through a lot of the film, if not all of it, Mary's unsafe. She doesn't really have anyone in her corner.
What was it like? What's it like to sort of be the main character in a movie where the title of the movie is based on another character entirely?
Yeah. Well, it's all Agnes's fault. Everything would have been fine if she hadn't opened her soul to that demon. I could have just kept on living in that convent, had a quiet life, dealing with Mother Superior's bullshit. But Agnes had to go and get herself possessed. And that is, what everyone else in the film is dealing with. We're all dealing with kind of the ripples of Agnes. Some people don't survive her, some do. And then how everyone deals with that. There's even the scene in the sandwich shop where Mary's two sisters, Sister Ruth and Sister Honey, come and try to get her back into the order, because that's what they know and that's what brings them comfort.
Yeah.
But they are not listening to Mary. They're not, it's one of the most obvious cries for help in the entire film. She tells them how she's feeling, that when she prays, she hears nothing back. And they can't even compute that, because they're so focused on dealing with their own trauma of what Agnes and the breaking up of their order did to them.
And I think one of the things that's most interesting about this film is the way it does tackle the question of faith, and how trauma can relate to that, and sometimes how trauma can lead us into one direction, but then we suddenly realize through another traumatic event that maybe that direction was not right for us. And I think was that something that was front and center if in the script when you first got it?
I don't know if it was so central to the script when I first read it, but for me, it is what jumped out as what I could give to Mary, and what I could give to the script, which was under the guise of horror, we are telling a story about trauma
Hmm.
and what happens when you don't have people to help you deal with it, or you don't have the tools to deal with it yourself.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for talking to me today, and
Yeah,
congratulations on the film.
thank you. Thank you for watching it. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I wanted to say I really appreciate Agnes. I thought it was a really terrific film. I like the way, and one of the things that was really struck me was the way that basically turns from one type of genre movie to a different type of genre movie almost at the drop of a hat, and it's very I think even on that initial viewing, it can be a bit jarring, but at the same time, you as the film progresses, I think it builds very beautifully from there. So I wanted to just mention that right off the bat.
Well, thank you.
What was the where did the inspiration for the movie come from?
Well, it originally started out as it was a Father Black movie. The television Exorcist
Hmm.
that comes in that pops in towards the middle there. I mean, that was kind of like really wanted to make a Father Black movie, and then after doing the two movies that preceded it, Strike Your Mistress and Curious Heart, and Climate of the Hunter. I was kind of on this, like female centric, kind of shadowy, like Bergman-esque blocking kind of kick and an obsession. And so when going into this movie, it was like, let's do that same thing, but with nuns. So it was this kind of idea of to have these this big group of nuns and kind of like block them in a way of like where every shot is like a Renaissance painting or something. You know what I mean? Um, and then so then starting with the nun story and then adding in the Exorcist, I was like, oh well, this is where we can throw in that Father Block Exorcist. Now he ends up being a very small character in it, but I mean it was originally going to start out as, or originally the concept was to make a Father Black movie. um, and so then from there it was just kind of like you're always writing like for the characters, and the characters just kind of like you know start to speak. There, the script kind of writes itself. It kind of becomes has a mind of its own, and these characters have a mind of their own, and it just kind of like culminated into this thing of like, all right, now let's move outside of the convent. So
Hmm.
it was almost subconscious writing in that degree.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that the movie almost starts off sort of like an exorcist type movie where you have the older priest, the younger priest, but they don't necessarily have this, but they're certainly not the same dynamic that you see in something like The Exorcist, where it's like you have this saintly old, you know, older priest who knows what this is about. He's very world weary, and he's very, it almost feels like his views of faith are very much out of step with how the younger priest is. Um, and they are almost, to a certain extent, they're almost the protagonists in the first half of the movie, and then it changes into a story about Mary. And when, how did that decision come into play when you were working out these ideas that you wanted to explore?
Like I said, it's just you're kind of writing for the characters, and the characters just kind of start writing themselves. And that was one character that was like, okay, let's see what happens to her after she leaves the convent. You know what I mean? And then just kind of went from there. The fun thing about it is that you're kind of looking for something different to be happening within the exorcism movie, like within the first part.
Mm-hmm.
um, but it literally is just playing off the exorcist tropes, like the exorcism movies in general, and that like it's kind of the movie you came to see, and then hit you hard in the middle to see the kind of movie that we were actually more interested in making. And so we got to play with those tropes and those cliches and everything that happens in those exorcism movies. We got to play with those a lot more because we knew where the second part was going to go.
Mm-hmm. What did at what time at what point when you were developing this idea did you did you put your script out there for Molly?
Oh, it was yeah, it was completely finished. I think they had a stack of scripts and they read all the scripts and they said, "Oh, this one, this is the most unique in the stack. So we'll let's see what's up with that one." And um, so yeah, so them getting the script was was great because the movie wouldn't have got made without them
Mm-hmm.
and without Molly being interested in the character of Mary and all that. So really, just kind of lucked out.
Were there any movies that you sort of drew inspiration from when it came to when you got down to directing the movie? Were there any films that you sort of took some visual inspiration from?
Absolutely. Um, so I guess in the structure of the kind of like the bait and switch structure is there's any number of films from Dust Till Dawn or Psycho or The Crying Game or Dead Presidents. These movies that kind of like you think you're watching one movie and then you're off into a whole other world. And so definitely trying to bring back that whole it was like something that they just started kind of doing in the 90s where they started like kind of combining two different movies
Mm-hmm.
together and it just never really took off and this was kind of like, hey, let's bring that back.
Yeah. When did you? At what point? How did you decide upon having Sean Gunn as the character that Mary really kind of connects to in the second half of the movie?
Well, I guess there were a few different actors that were there for that role, and it was kind of like, okay, so it was basically like, let's figure out who's playing him, and then we'll figure out kind of more of a solid direction for what those scenes are going to be and how he's going to be and
Mm-hmm.
how how his stand up is going to be. You know what I mean? Because he's kind of like a not necessarily just straight up funny. He's not doing gags. It's more of like a Bill Hicks kind of situation where he's also trying to kind of incorporate some philosophy in there. Um, and just kind of this like self-important comedian. And when Sean Gunn came along and was interested in the part, it was like, okay, well, let's start designing this character around him.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that's kind of interesting is that the supernatural part of the movie doesn't really go away, but at the same time, there seem to be some moments where it's more explicit that that's in fact what's happening, but there are also times where maybe you can kind of question whether that's the reality of what's happening. Is that something that you is that something that you kind of wanted audiences to sort of be questioning later on in the film?
Well, I mean, the whole thing is kind of told in almost this kind of dream logic, and that's because when you know it's a trick I found. I don't know, like 4 or 5 years ago. Like other filmmakers have had wrapped their minds around it far long before I ever did. But it was something that helped me in kind of developing a style and creating uh, just kind of create your own world, your own dream world, your own kind of dream logic. You know what I mean? That where you really don't have to. You really don't have to obey the rules of realism or obey the rules of how a character would realistically act in this situation. You know what I mean? Because it's not real. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And if you're creating your own world, then you can create your own logic within it. And so it helps in a lot of things. But it helps in kind of designing everything. And then when you're watching the movie, yeah, it has a different kind of different feel, and that's how to create a unique world out of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's all for me. I thank you very much for your time today.
Hey, appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, and congratulations on the movie. I really was quite taken by it, and I really love what the movie seemed to be going forward as far as an idea of faith. And one of the things I think was interesting how it's like with the character Mary, you have this idea of a trauma is leading her to faith, and then another trauma kind of takes her away from faith, and just sort of that tension of, well, which one, is there more authentic? Is there an authenticity to, was it just she felt like she needed to go to the first one, and then just because that kind of was in her idea, in her head at the time, or was it something that she, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but I really appreciate the fact that it's I really thought it was a lovely film. So an idea.
Thank you. Yeah, John and I, when writing this stuff, we really kind of mull over all the different possibilities and all the different interpretations that could come from it. And so it invites interpretation, and that's kind of the whole point and the whole reason for it all. But we kind of we kind of figure out a way to justify every decision that we make, and how and what it might what meaning might stem from it. But we don't necessarily have an agenda of like a hardcore, like this is the basis of what it is. It's more like let's keep this open-ended. Let's keep this open-ended here to keep everything a little more ambiguous, so it's more of a mystery.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Thank you again for talking to me today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right.